one of the things that the Special Rapporteur, Francisco, has emphasized to me, when IPLP supported Professor James Anaya as Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, is that you have to be optimistic. You try to identify best practices. And as Jim used to tell me, they're not always the best in the world, but some of them are pretty darn good. And I think our next speaker will be talking about the bill that is being introduced, bipartisan, by Representative Grijalva, and that is the Advancing Human Rights-Centered International Conservation Act of 2022. It's HR 725. And truly, if you compare it to the types of situations that the lack of the rule of law creates in many of these countries and the violence and intimidation of indigenous peoples, you can see how an act like this can really set the standard for the world on the appropriate approach to working with and cooperating with and letting indigenous peoples lead the international global conservation movement that's confronting this crisis that confronts all of us. I've known Ruben for an awful long time. My children grew up marching with Ruben and his wife in MLK days and Cesar Chavez days and protesting this state's horrible policies, anti-immigration policies, and to see Ruben work with Congressman Grijalva and the types of work he does at the district level, at the national level, it makes me proud to say that I'm his colleague and friend and longtime compadre. I do want to mention another best practice. Ruben is the partner of our mayor, Regina Romero. And another best practice that was done by the city of Tucson, which we're all very proud of, was the return of the base of Sentinel Peak, right outside of downtown Tucson, to the Tohono O'odham because of its close connection to those ancestral lands. And so, not to say that Tucson leads the world in best practices, but we've got a couple of really good examples right here. So it's really my pleasure to introduce Ruben, who's come from a very busy schedule to talk about this legislation. Thank you, Ruben. And don't feel dismayed. You can talk for 10, 15 minutes.
Muy buenos días. Hello. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I haven't been, well, I know this site as, first of all, my name is Ruben Reyes. I am the district director for Congressman Raúl Grijalva. I've been his district director for about 20 years now, but I also worked with the congressman when he was on the Board of Supervisors. And a little bit before that, I used to work for this program. I always consider this site to be Hohokam Middle School. As Mr. Valencia knows, this site schooled mostly Pascuayaqui kids. I used to work with the consortium of kids that I followed them from middle school to high school and hopefully to post-secondary education. And every time I came to this campus, I was always struck back by the beauty of its location and its land. And for those of you guys that are here, I don't know, for the first time maybe, you're getting great views. And a big hello to those of you that are joining us virtually. While it's very pragmatic and very resourceful to be with us online, you really are missing great views. I just want to still throw that little jab in. And I apologize again, I do have to do, it's a light morning for me. After this, I have to go to another meeting to discuss border infrastructure and border comprehensive immigration reform to the All Border Counties Coalition. So last night when I was telling people what I was going to do this morning, they tell them, well, I'm going to go speak on indigenous human rights all over the world. It says, ooh, that's a hard one. But I corrected them because, no, I don't think it's a hard one because I'm speaking to the choir. I don't think I need to convince anybody about what we're doing here today. And for that, I thank you because I think the way the congressman sees all of you and the rest of the advocates around the world are partners in this long-lost struggle for many, many injustices around the world. So thank you for what you have done on behalf of human rights for indigenous people, not just in indigenous lands in the United States, but throughout the world. HR 7025. Most of you, if not all, know about this bill, but I will give it a brief introduction just to make sure we're all on the same page, and then I will give a congressional update, and then a few questions if time permits. While this is unfortunately a long issue, it wasn't until 2019 because of some news articles that led to an investigation into the roles and responsibilities that the United States government agencies regarding international conservation and human rights. Over the last couple of years, the Committee on Natural Resources has conducted a bipartisan investigation into the role that the World Wildlife Fund and the Department of the Interior, DOI, regarding these allegations of human rights abuses at conservation parks and around the world. These reports obviously came back very bad, and they unveiled decades of abuse towards indigenous and local people in the name of conservation, and quite frankly, were deeply unsettling. The Natural Resources Committee had an oversight hearing back in 2021 and revealed a lot of shortcomings about how the World Wildlife Fund carried out its work and how the DOI oversaw grant funding in these challenging circumstances and locations. It was due to that Congressman Grijalva, surprise, surprise, got together with a Republican committee counterpart, Representative Westerman, and they introduced HR 7025 into the last Congress. We don't always agree with the other side on a lot of the work, especially in the work in the Natural Resources Committee, but both staff and many members of Congress got together and worked in a bipartisan manner on the critical issue of protecting human rights in international conservation. HR 7025 recognizes the United States' important role in international conservation and that we need to do it better, period. Specifically, this bill establishes common sense safeguards to protect human rights and ensure that conservation projects are successful. These safeguards are based upon the work and recommendations of the UN Special Rapporteurs for Indigenous Rights and the collaborative efforts of indigenous leaders and to establish a gold standard for human rights in conservation. HR 7025 does three main things. First, it carries over vetting procedures that are already applied to the State Department and Department of Defense grants, prohibiting funding to armed security forces that have committed gross violations of human rights. Second, it establishes procedures for when the DOI learns of credible information about human rights violations related to grants the department has provided. Specifically, it removes political decision-making, replacing it with thorough, fair, and transparent processes for investigating and addressing these allegations. And third, this legislation weaves the highest human rights standards into grants contracts. Respect for indigenous and local people should be integral for conservation projects the United States funds. We listened and learned from indigenous leaders about the values and standards that should be elevated in this legislation. HR 7025 is the model for treating indigenous people with respect and should be replicated across the U.S. government and around the world. Last Congress, with bipartisan margins in the House of Representatives, it passed. Unfortunately, it died in the Senate. It had no companion bill, even though there was interest by some senators. However, nobody picked up the mantra, and it eventually it died in the Senate. This last year, the Department of Interior and the State Department have started working on a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, to ensure that all of DOI's relevant grantees are vetted by the State Department. As we speak, the Department of the Interior, along with the State Department, are working together to complete draft language on that MOU. That's going on right now. Our timeline that we have for that is hopefully middle to late spring is when the draft language on that MOU, hopefully being able to draft legislation later on, hopefully in the summer, and introduce it again. Congressman Grijalva is committed to once again working with hopefully again, this time the chair, Chairman Westerman, and try to go about it the same way and working on it on a bipartisan issue. That's the only way we're going to get it through, especially in this divided Congress. We sense, we assume, and we expect that the interest on the other side of the aisle is still there, especially from leadership. So with that in mind, again, this is Congress we're talking about. Okay, 1 + 1 does not always equals 2 here. So I'm providing that timeline, but please don't hold me to it. That is kind of like the expected timeline, dropping that bill in hopefully in the summer, early to midsummer, and then try to perhaps more aggressively pursue a companion bill in the Senate and see where it goes from there. So.
Could you take a couple of questions, Ruben? Or
I could try.
We won't hold you to anything. We can turn off the cameras if you want.
No, that's fine.
Thank you for that overview. Again, very important legislation.
But I'll take a question or two. That's pretty much it. We're going about it again. DOI and State Department is working on it. It's going to be in April, hopefully, when they come up with some language, and then hopefully early, midsummer, we'll be able to drop the bill again and see where we go.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, one question.
Yes, sir.
Please.
Are you aware of any lobbying by WCS or WWF or any of those organizations against the bill?
So the question was whether or not the congressman and his office and Ruben were aware of any lobbying by WWF and some of the other major players in the conservation business.
From my understanding and speaking to committee staffers yesterday, no, not at this moment. That doesn't mean it won't exist, but that also doesn't mean that we won't be on the lookout for it, considering what happened in the Oversight Committee.
All right. Thank you so much for taking time to come to speak to us on this important legislation.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.